"We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." But what she didn't know was that her daughter had just sold more than bricks and wood. She sold her mother's memories, her legacy, her trust, and karma was waiting quietly. This is not just a story, it's a wake-up call. You're about to witness a life-changing emotional journey where a betrayed mother, left with nothing, rises quietly and reclaims everything. If you love stories about undercover revenge, broken families, deep secrets, and powerful redemption, you're in the right place. I sat in the doctor's waiting room, the kind of sterile, half-lit room where chairs are bolted to the floor and people silently pretend to read outdated magazines. My heart thudded in my chest, though perhaps it was grief doing most of the work. It had been 6 months since Robert died, and in all that time, I'd grown accustomed to the emptiness, the soft echo of absence in every quiet corner of the house. Then my phone rang. The name Angela flashed on the screen. My only daughter. My breath caught. Her voice when she spoke was calm, too calm. "Mom, we're leaving for Europe tomorrow. I sold your beach house. I sold your car. We needed the money. Goodbye." No hesitation, no apology, just that clipped finality. I remember the silence after she hung up, how the world seemed to hold its breath with me. 45 years I had poured into raising her sacrifices, love, sleepless nights, hopes, yet she discarded me in 2 sentences. In that moment I felt shock, betrayal, despair. But more than anything, a quiet resolve started to bloom within me. She has no idea what she's done. My name is Antonia Brooks, and I'm 71 years old. Until that phone call, I believed I understood my daughter completely. I loved her with all I had, even after I lost the only man I ever loved her father. Robert and I shared a life so ordinary it felt sacred. Every morning, we would sit at our kitchen table. Coffee, toast, soft conversation. On the morning he died, he placed a cup of coffee in front of me with cream, offered the toast, kissed my forehead, whispered, "Good morning, my love," as though nothing was different. Then his chest tightened. He collapsed. That was it. Since then, Angela had taken on the role of the devoted daughter. She came by 3 times a week. She helped plan the funeral. She took me grocery shopping, accompanied me to doctor visits. She insisted I take care of my health now that I was alone. She said, "Mom, you deserve peace, security." I believed her. I was wrong. When the call ended, I sat on that hard plastic chair in the waiting room. Around me, strangers coughed, leafed through magazines, tapped footrests. I stayed motionless. I didn't cry. The shock numbed me. But somewhere in that numbness, a flicker of something unexpected. A calm, a clarity took hold. In that hush, I remembered. 3 days before Robert died, he handed me a plain manila envelope and whispered, "Antonia, put this in your dresser drawer. If anything happens, open it when you feel ready." Overwhelmed, I followed his instructions. Later, consumed by grief and doctor visits and mountains of paperwork, I forgot about it altogether. Now, in that quiet waiting room, with Angela's cold words echoing in my ears, that envelope stirred in my memory. I forced myself to rise, to leave the clinic, to step out into the sun-drenched city. With each step, I let the hurt and the anger gather strength. Angela thought she had left me with nothing, but she had no idea how wrong she was. I did not own a car anymore, she declared. But as I walked toward the bus stop, something about the injustice of it all felt poetic. She believed she had stripped me bare. She believed I was alone, powerless, broken. But I was none of those things. Not yet. The bus arrived. I sat by the window and stared out at the city as it rolled past the shops, the buildings, the people carrying their own invisible burdens. Each life out the window held a secret, a wound, a story. I had my own, and now I was inching toward the moment when it would unravel. Back home, I closed the door behind me and walked straight to my bedroom. My hands trembled as I opened the dresser drawer. There it lay, the manila envelope exactly where I had left it. I paused, breath held, as a shiver passed through me. Inside were documents. Many documents papers I'd never seen but had always somehow trusted were there. Outside, twilight crept in, and the house's shadows deepened. The silence no longer terrified me. I settled onto the bed we shared for so many years and tore open that envelope as though it were the last piece of proof I would ever need. Inside lay deeds, bank certificates, a handwritten letter in my husband's familiar handwriting. My dear Antonia, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. Forgive me for hiding the full truth, but I wanted to protect you from worry. Over time, I invested our savings wisely. We own more than the beach. You are richer than you know. All of it is yours. Please believe in yourself as I believed in you. I sat in stunned stillness. Tears blurred my vision. My knees pounded. My breath came in sharp bursts. I had been broken, yes, but not powerless. Angela had miscalculated. She had counted on fear, on vulnerability, on mercy. But in that moment, I recognized something far more dangerous. I had a plan. I would not storm in and demand ransom. I would not unleash vengeance in public displays. I would let the unraveling be quiet, precise, untraceable. She would discover that the widow she believed she abandoned was never really abandoned. When night fell, I slept, not in sorrow, but resolved. 3 words drifted through my dreams: stand up, rise, reclaim. The path ahead would not be easy, but a storm was coming, and I would be its eye. The next morning, the first light of dawn spilled into my bedroom, casting golden lines across the walls. The manila envelope still lay beside me on the bed, opened, its secrets half unraveled like the edge of a mystery begging to be understood. I reached for it with trembling fingers. It still didn't feel real. That after a lifetime of quiet living, of scraping together coupons and counting every dime, I was now on paper wealthy. But Robert had always been a man of quiet surprises, a man who read financial books at night while others watched TV, who took notes in notebooks that he never let me see. Now I knew why. I pulled out the documents again, one by one. There were property deeds from neighborhoods I had never even visited, names of streets that sounded distant and unfamiliar, like places from someone else's life. One listed an oceanfront condo, another a small motel on the coast, another the 20-story apartment complex where Angela lived with Edward. My heart stuttered. Angela thought she had sold my only home. She thought she had left me penniless. But she had been living in my property the entire time. Robert had registered everything under a business entity I didn't recognize, Robert Investments Incorporated, and then placed me as the sole heir. According to the documents, I had legal ownership of every asset, every account, every investment. There were even stocks in companies I had never heard of, tech startups, energy firms, medical labs. Bank statements followed pages and pages of numbers, balances I could hardly comprehend, numbers with more zeros than I'd ever seen in our old checking account. One savings account alone had nearly $500,000. Another was filled with dividend payments. Robert hadn't just saved, he had multiplied. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, and stared at the documents. The enormity of what had been hidden from me for decades sank in slowly. Robert had built a quiet empire and never once made me feel poor for not knowing. In his letter, he had written, "I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to change how you treated people. Most of all, I didn't want Angela to know. I feared what money might do to her heart. She always wanted more. I wanted her to love us for who we were, not what we had." I swallowed hard. He had been right. If Angela had known, she would have played the role of loving daughter perfectly, until the right time came to cash in. But now she thought I was alone, weak, broken. She had taken everything she thought I had left, left for Europe with her untrustworthy husband and never looked back. And yet here I was, quietly holding the deeds to her apartment, the accounts to which she owed rent, and the very house she thought she had sold out from under me. I could go to the authorities, press charges, take her to court for fraud, but what would that teach her? Something inside me shifted. A quiet fire took hold. No, I would not go to war. I would outwit her, silently, elegantly. I would reclaim what was mine, not with anger, but with control. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, placed Robert's letter neatly back in its envelope, and began writing a list of steps. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it yet, but I knew I needed help, legal help, discreet help. I remembered Robert's lawyer, Mr. Peterson. He had been there at the funeral, a kind man with silver-rimmed glasses and a firm handshake. He'd offered his condolences and said, "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." It was time. I picked up the phone and dialed his office. A secretary answered. "Good morning. Peterson and Associates. How may I help you?" "This is Mrs. Antonia Brooks. I need to speak with Mr. Peterson. It's urgent." There was a pause. Then the familiar, warm voice of Mr. Peterson came through the line. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm so glad you called. How are you holding up?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Better than anyone knows, Mr. Peterson. And I need your help with something delicate." "Of course." "My office is open tomorrow morning. Shall I schedule you for 9 a.m.? "Yes, and Mr. Peterson. Everything we discuss must remain completely confidential. You have my word." After I hung up, I exhaled deeply. This was the beginning. Angela had counted me out. She thought she'd won. But what she didn't realize was this. I may have lost my husband, but I had just found something else, something far more powerful than grief. I had found my purpose, and Angela was about to learn that the mother she had underestimated was the woman who held all the cards. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because I was remembering. Memories flooded back in vivid color of long summer days, the scent of salt on Angela's hair, Robert whistling as he grilled fish on the patio, the sound of our daughter's laughter echoing across the wooden porch of the beach house. It wasn't just a house, it was a place woven from memories, woven from love. Angela had sold it like it was nothing. The next morning, I pulled out an old photo album from the shelf in the living room, one I hadn't opened in years. Dust clung to the corners, but inside were snapshots of a life once full, a life that, even in its simplicity, felt rich. In one photo, Angela was 15, sunburned and smiling, sitting on the porch steps with a milkshake in one hand and Robert's old straw hat tilted on her head. In another, Robert was lying in a hammock, our dog curled by his feet, with Angela painting seashells nearby. It was Christmas. There was no snow, just sand and pine garlands hung from the railing. That was the year Angela brought home her first boyfriend. I remember cooking for all of them, ham, casseroles, too many desserts. I remember the mess, the laughter, the music. That beach house had been bought with decades of sacrifice. Robert worked extra shifts driving the bus. I cleaned houses on weekends. Every penny we saved. We had nothing growing up, so we dreamed of giving Angela everything. And what did she see in that house? A quick sale, liquid cash, a line item on a spreadsheet. The betrayal cut deep, not just because she sold it, but because she erased what it meant. And the car. Oh, Robert's truck. That old Ford pickup meant more to him than anyone understood. He washed it every Sunday, changed the oil every 3,000 miles like clockwork. Even when it started coughing in the winter, he'd gently coax it back to life like it was an old friend who just needed a little encouragement. He parked it in the same spot every day under the oak tree that now leaned a little heavier than before. He said the shade kept the paint from fading, but I think it was more than that. After he died, I would sometimes sit in the truck, windows rolled down, engine off, just to smell the remnants of him, the faint scent of his aftershave still lingering on the upholstery. That scent was gone now. So was the truck. Angela had sold it too. She hadn't asked. She hadn't blinked. She just did it. And now, all that remained of Robert in my everyday life, his voice, his scent, his touch, had been swept away in 2 transactions I never approved. I walked outside that morning and stood under the tree where the truck had always been. The spot looked naked, exposed. The grass had already started growing back where the tires used to sit. I felt something burn in my throat, but I refused to cry. That's what Angela had wanted. Whether she admitted it or not, she wanted me passive. She wanted me helpless. She wanted me to be grateful for the crumbs she decided to leave behind. She was wrong. Because what she didn't know, what she could never understand, was that there are things in this life you cannot just sell. Not for profit, not for convenience, not for love, not even for survival. A home is not just a property. A truck is not just a vehicle. And a mother is not just an old woman to be discarded when her usefulness runs out. Later that afternoon, as I stood in my kitchen making tea, the sunlight caught the edge of a photo frame on the counter. It was our last family trip to the beach house. Angela, Robert, and I standing by the waves. We were older, weathered, but still smiling. I stared at that photo for a long time. Angela thought she had taken everything from me. But she had forgotten one thing, something Robert always used to say whenever life became too difficult. They can take what you own, but they'll never own what you remember. I placed the photo back on the counter and whispered, "Thank you, Robert. I remember. I always will." And then I picked up the phone to call Mr. Peterson again. It was time to start taking back what was mine, not out of vengeance, but out of love. Love for the man who built everything, and for the woman I was about to become. The next morning, I dressed more carefully than I had in months. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to remind myself who I used to be. I slipped into the wine-colored dress Robert always said made me look elegant. I fixed my hair, touched up my lipstick, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a grieving widow anymore. I saw a woman with purpose. Downtown was bustling when I arrived at Mr. Peterson's office. It was located in one of those old buildings with marble floors and brass handles built in another era, like me. The receptionist recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Peterson is expecting you." Right this way, I stepped into his office and was greeted by that familiar, kind smile. But as soon as I laid the manila envelope and the stack of documents on his desk, his smile faltered. He began flipping through the papers. His brows lifted, his lips pressed into a line. "Mrs. Brooks," he said slowly, This is far more than I expected." I said nothing. He continued reading page after page, highlighting Robert's investments, the ownership documents, the shell company that quietly held every asset. Finally, he sat back in his chair, glasses perched low on his nose. Robert was a very intelligent man and meticulous. "Everything here is in order, completely legal. You, Mrs. Brooks, are now the sole owner of all these assets." "And the beach house?" I asked, my voice calm. "Your daughter had no legal right to sell it. She didn't own it, nor was she listed on any of the documents. That sale is invalid, fraudulent technically. Can we reverse it?" "Easily. Since the buyers were unaware of the fraud, they're entitled to a full refund, but the house reverts to you." I nodded. "And legal action against Angela?" He hesitated. "Technically, yes. But is that what you want?" "No," I said, standing. "I want to do this my way, quietly. I don't want her to know I'm involved." He blinked. "You want to reclaim your assets? Without your daughter knowing you're the one behind it?" "Exactly. And the apartment building where she lives?" "That too. I want full, direct control." "Quietly." He leaned back, a smile creeping back onto his face, one of curiosity, maybe even admiration. "It will take a few weeks," he said. There are administrative procedures, title transfers, and notification requirements, but yes, it's all feasible." "Good," I said, standing. "And Mr. Peterson, not a word of this to anyone." "You have my complete discretion, Mrs. Brooks." As I left his office, I felt lighter, but not in a carefree way. It was the lightness that comes when you finally stopped pretending to be weak. I stepped out onto the city sidewalk and looked up at the buildings towering above me. So many people, so many lives, and none of them knew that the old woman in the burgundy dress had just made the first move in a very quiet war. Over the next few days, I returned to my normal routines outwardly. I watered the plants, shopped at the market, smiled at the neighbors. I was the same woman they'd seen for years. But inside, everything was different. At night, I reviewed Robert's documents over tea. I marked pages, listed properties, tracked accounts. I was learning things I never imagined I'd have to know: tax terms, investment returns, property codes. I was no longer just surviving, I was planning. Mr. Peterson called often. Each time he updated me with progress. The beach house was successfully reclaimed. The ownership transfer of the apartment building was underway. Bank accounts were being secured. Officially, I was still a widow living modestly. But quietly, I was becoming a landowner, a businesswoman, a force. And Angela? She had no idea. Not yet. She was thousands of miles away, thinking she had stolen everything that mattered, thinking her mother was licking her wounds in some tiny rental apartment, grieving a house and a truck. What she didn't know was that I had already taken the first step towards something much bigger than revenge. I was building the perfect lesson, one that wouldn't come with shouting or lawyers or courtroom drama. No, this would come in silence, through inconvenience, through discomfort, through loss. And when she returned, she would not find the mother she had left behind. She would find someone else, someone stronger, someone who no longer begged for love. The days that followed were some of the strangest of my life. By all appearances, I was just an old widow abandoned by her only child, living alone in a quiet neighborhood. I still walked to the market, still greeted the neighbors with a tired smile, still bought only the essentials. The only difference was the performance, and I had become quite good at it. Each morning, I brewed my coffee at the same kitchen table where Robert and I had shared decades of breakfasts. I would glance at his chair across from mine and smile, not out of grief, but because I knew he'd be proud. Outside, I was Antonia the Forgotten. Inside, I was Antonia the Architect. Behind the scenes, Mr. Peterson worked swiftly. Every few days, he called to share progress. The beach house sale had been reversed, just as promised. The previous buyers, though confused, had accepted the refund without issue. The property was mine again, legally and unequivocally. Angela's apartment building was more complex. The company Robert had used to register the deed was airtight, but shifting control to my name on paper required time. Legal filings, administrative checks, silent restructuring of management, all things that couldn't be rushed if secrecy was the goal. I told Mr. Peterson I could wait. What Angela didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Yet. In the meantime, I stayed put. Angela had probably assumed I would be forced to move in with a friend or rent a single room somewhere. That was her plan, displace me, then offer crumbs of comfort from afar to soothe her conscience. A 30% cut of the money from my own home, deposited into my account, like a pity donation. What a deal. But I wasn't moving anywhere. The house was mine. The roof above me, the walls around me, the garden outside it was all still legally mine. And I wasn't giving up a single inch. One afternoon, while I was watering the hydrangeas in front of the porch, my neighbor Aurora walked up. She had lived next door for 20 years, a kind woman with a sharp tongue and even sharper eyes. "Antonia, darling," she called, leaning over the fence, "is it true that Angela left for Europe and didn't even say goodbye?" I gave her the same soft smile I gave everyone else these days. "Yes, she left with Edward. They have..." big business plans. Aurora's brow furrowed. And you? How are you going to manage on your own? We all knew Robert didn't leave much. Are you okay? If you only knew, I thought. I'll be fine, I said, gentle and vague, taking things one day at a time. I can bring you some food, she offered with genuine concern, or help with groceries. You know I'm just across the way. You're very kind, I replied, but I'm managing. Really? That exchange repeated itself everywhere I went. The butcher, the bakery, even the girl at the corner store. Everyone wore that same expression when they spoke to me. A mix of pity, respect, and relief that they weren't the ones being left behind. It was fascinating. I had never known how differently people treat you when they think you have nothing. And yet, I found it liberating. In this disguise of vulnerability, no one questioned me. No one pried, and no one suspected that behind the worn cardigans and quiet demeanor was a woman orchestrating a full-scale reclamation. One Wednesday morning, Mr. Peterson called with an update. Mrs. Brooks, good news. The beach house is officially back in your name, and we've made serious progress on the apartment building. Excellent, I said, sipping my coffee. And Angela? She hasn't contacted us. No word from her or Edward. Still in Europe, as far as we know. Let's keep it that way. Of course. And Mr. Peterson, I added, I want you to begin tracking the truck. Robert's truck. I want it back. That may be more difficult, he said cautiously. It was legally sold using a power of attorney granted by you. What? You signed it a few months ago, after Robert's death. Angela brought the papers. Do you remember? A sick feeling crawled into my stomach. I did remember. Vaguely. In the fog of grief, Angela had placed documents in front of me, told me they were for inheritance transfers, funeral arrangements. I signed them without reading. Of course I had. I trusted her. How naive. I want that truck back, I said firmly. Do whatever it takes. Yes, Mrs. Brooks. But we'll need to prove she misled you, acted in bad faith. She did, I said, and I'll prove it. After the call, I went to the living room and stared out the window. Across the street, children played. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Everything looked normal. But my world was no longer normal. I had once been a mother who gave everything for her daughter. Now I was a woman preparing to take everything back. Quietly, precisely, and just in time. 3 weeks passed. The neighborhood had already adjusted to the idea of me being alone. The pity in their eyes was fading, replaced by the quiet admiration people often have for those who appear to suffer silently. I wore my role like a second skin now. The humble, heartbroken widow, the invisible woman, but behind the curtains, the real work continued. Mr. Peterson called with regular updates, each one more satisfying than the last. The beach house? Fully reinstated, utilities transferred, keys returned. The apartment building? Almost finalized. He said that in just a few more days, I'd have legal control over the building where Angela and Edward had lived for years without ever paying a single dime of rent. The sweetest part? They had no idea, but fate, as it turned out, was preparing its own twist. One afternoon, as I sat trimming dead leaves from my gardenias, Aurora came rushing over breathless, her face lit with gossip. "Antonia," she said in a whisper as though it were sacred news, "did you hear?" "Hear what?" "Edward's in trouble." "Serious trouble?" I raised an eyebrow, politely intrigued. "My brother-in-law works at the bank," she continued. "He said Edward took out multiple loans, big ones using the condo as collateral. But here's the catch." She leaned in. "The condo isn't in his name." I sipped my tea and blinked. "Oh, how strange," I said softly. "Strange? It's a disaster. They're saying the documents were, well, questionable. Now the bank's investigating. And get this. Angela apparently had no idea. He never told her. I stared into my teacup, swirling the contents slowly. Poor Angela. I said with a small sigh, but inside, I was smiling. It was all unfolding faster than I'd anticipated. Edward had gambled with property that never belonged to him. Angela had trusted a man who was nothing more than a smooth-talking fraud. And now, the cracks were beginning to show. That evening, I called Mr. Peterson. "I want to know everything," I told him, "about Edward's debts, the loans, the forged documents, everything." "It will take time," he warned. "We'll need to do it quietly." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. "I just want it done right." Over the next few days, I continued my quiet routine, pretending not to know that halfway across the world, my daughter's world was collapsing. Then, just as I was clipping coupons at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "I have some news. Your daughter just landed in the country. She's at the airport alone." "Alone?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Edward isn't with her. There are rumors they had a major falling out." I sat back in my chair, letting the news settle. Of course, Edward had taken the money and run. He had no loyalty, no plan. He was just looking for an escape, and Angela had been his exit ticket. She'd sacrificed her family, her home, and her dignity for him. And in return, he left her holding the bag. "Did you send the letter?" I asked. "I did," he said. "The eviction notice went to her apartment this morning. The doorman confirmed delivery perfect." "And Mrs. Brooks, I just want to confirm one more time. Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with this?" I stood and walked to the window, watching the golden light of late afternoon fall across Robert's tree. She called me from a doctor's waiting room and told me she had sold everything I loved. She treated me like I was an inconvenience. She thought I had nothing. I turned back to the phone. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," I'm sure understood. When I hung up, I didn't feel giddy. I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced, as if the universe was finally tipping back into place. Angela had left me behind for a man who was now a ghost. She had built her life on a lie, and now she was watching it unravel. But this wasn't revenge. This was education, and class had just begun. Angela returned on a Tuesday night. I knew this not because she called me, of course she didn't, but because Aurora knocked on my door the next morning with the latest chapter in our neighborhood soap opera. "She's back," she said in a hushed voice. "Last night. I saw her with my own eyes. I raised an eyebrow." "One suitcase," Aurora added. "No Edward, no car. She looked terrible, pale, exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days." I simply nodded, hiding the swirl of emotion rising inside me. She had to ask the superintendent to let her into the building. She didn't have her keys. Interesting. So Edward had taken the keys. Or perhaps Angela had left in such a hurry, she hadn't even thought to bring them. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was back and completely alone. Later that afternoon, Mr. Peterson called me. "She received the letter," he confirmed. "The doorman handed it to her personally. 30 days to vacate, as per legal standard." "And you're still sure you want to go through with this?" he asked. "I've never been more certain," I said. "Angela thought she could treat me like an afterthought. Now she's going to learn that actions have consequences." There was a pause on the line. Mr. Peterson didn't say it, but I could hear the weight behind his silence. I understood. I wasn't blind to the gravity of what I was doing, but this wasn't about punishment. Not really. This was about showing her the full impact of what she had done. The next morning, at precisely 8 a.m., the phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I already knew. "Mom!" Angela's voice was thin, strained, on the verge of cracking. "Good morning, sweetheart," I answered warmly. I need to talk to you. Urgently." "Oh, what's wrong?" "I got a letter yesterday from some company, Robert Investments. It says I have to vacate my apartment in 30 days. Is this a mistake?" I let a pause stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "A company?" I asked innocently. I've never heard of it. It says they own the building, that I'm being evicted. How strange, I said softly. Angela's breath caught. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. Edward's gone. He left me, took the rest of the money. I haven't heard from him since I landed. And now this. I sat down at the kitchen table, looking out the window as I spoke. I'm so sorry, honey. That sounds awful. Where are you now? At the apartment. But I don't know for how long. There was a long silence, then hesitantly, Mom, can I come see you? Please? I don't have anyone else. There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. After all her arrogance, after selling my house, after throwing away 45 years of love and sacrifice with a 2-minute phone call. Now she was coming back to me. Not out of love, not out of guilt, but because she had no one else. And I was ready. Of course, sweetheart, I said gently. Come whenever you like. I'm on my way, she said, voice breaking. I hung up and walked to the mirror. Time for wardrobe. No jewelry, no expensive perfume. Just my gray cardigan, a modest dress, and the softest expression I could manage. Angela needed to see exactly what she expected. A poor, grieving mother. The same woman she had abandoned without a second thought. An hour later, she knocked on the door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. Her eyes were sunken, her cheeks hollowed. The confident posture she once carried had crumbled into something hesitant, fractured. Her designer coat hung loose on her frame. Her hands trembled. Hi, Mom, she whispered. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around the house like she was seeing it for the first time. Would you like some coffee? I asked. She nodded silently. As the kettle boiled, I stole glances at her. She wasn't just tired. She was broken. And for the first time in months, I felt something twist inside me. Not anger, not satisfaction, but something softer. Something dangerously close to compassion. We sat in the kitchen, just the two of us. It had been months since Angela and I last shared this space, and yet it felt like years, like lifetimes had passed between us. She sat with her hands wrapped around the coffee cup I had given her, as if the warmth might anchor her to something real. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into a still pond. I'm so sorry for the way I left, she continued, her voice cracking. I know I didn't treat you well. I was selfish. I didn't see things clearly. I thought. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I didn't rush her. I just sat quietly, like I had done so many times when she was a little girl struggling to confess to breaking something in the house. This was no broken lamp. I treated you like a burden, she finally said, and now I have nothing. Edward left me. He lied about everything. There was never any business in Europe. It was all a fantasy to cover his debts. She swallowed hard. We're tens of thousands of dollars in debt, maybe more. He used the apartment as collateral without telling me. I trusted him, Mom. I gave him everything. And now I'm here, with nowhere else to go. She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red, not just from tears, but from shame. Can I stay here? Just for a while, until I get back on my feet. This was the moment I had imagined so many times. Angela back in my home, not triumphant, not condescending, not generous with false compassion, but broken. Asking not for control but for safety. I had played out this scene in my head countless times. Sometimes I would reject her, just as she had done to me. Other times I would laugh, cold and cruel. But now that the moment was real, I found myself doing neither. Instead, I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. Of course, sweetheart, I said softly. This will always be your home. Her shoulders sagged in relief. She hadn't expected that, not after what she'd done. Really? She asked. Really? I nodded. You're my daughter. That will never change." She got up and came around the table to hug me, not like she used to with the stiff obligation of a holiday photo, but with desperation, like she was clinging to the last solid thing in a world that had turned to dust. I hugged her back, but my embrace, unlike hers, wasn't desperate. It was controlled, measured. I was no longer hugging my daughter out of maternal instinct. I was hugging her like a chess player moves a piece precisely, intentionally, because now the game had entered its second phase. Angela would live here. She would eat at this table, sleep in her old room. But she wouldn't know that the walls around her belonged to a woman she had tried to erase, that the food she ate came from bank accounts she thought didn't exist, that every moment of her fragile rebuilding was being carefully monitored. That night, she returned to the apartment to gather her things. She came back with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. That was all that remained of her old life. I watched her unpack slowly in her childhood bedroom, the one with the faded wallpaper and the bookshelf still filled with her high school novels. She moved carefully, almost reverently, as if the room were a museum exhibit of a girl she no longer recognized. Later that evening, she came into the kitchen holding something. "Mom," she said quietly, "I found this in the apartment, among Edward's papers. It's addressed to you." She handed me a small manila envelope. My heart stuttered. It had Robert's handwriting on it. Another envelope. Angela looked at me curiously. "Do you know what it is?" I shook my head slowly. "No, your father never mentioned a second envelope. Do you want to open it now?" I looked at the envelope, then at her. "Tomorrow," I said. "Let's sleep first." She nodded and headed to her room. I stayed at the kitchen table long after she had gone, staring at the envelope. If Robert had left me one last message, it was for a reason, and something told me this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The morning light crept gently into the kitchen as I sat alone at the table, the manila envelope between my palms like a warm heartbeat. I hadn't slept. I had laid awake all night thinking of what could possibly be inside what else Robert might have left me. His first letter had changed the entire course of my life. What would this one do? I turned the envelope over slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. His, to Antonia. For when she's ready, again. It was the again that made my breath catch. I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter and something small, metallic, a key. I placed it carefully on the table and unfolded the letter, hands trembling just as they had the first time. My dearest Antonia, if you are reading this, then you've already opened the first envelope. That means you know the truth that our life wasn't as small as it seemed, that we built more than just a marriage. We built a legacy. But if you're reading this second letter, it means you've come to a point where you're faced with a choice, a moral one. And I know you, my love. You would never open this unless your heart was conflicted. This key opens a safe deposit box at Rockwell Trust Bank. Inside, you'll find access to the final piece of what I've saved. Not for you, but for her, for Angela. I froze. My eyes scanned the words again, faster now. I know what you're thinking. She hurt you. She betrayed your love, your sacrifices. But Antonia, she's still our daughter. She is flawed, deeply so, but she is not beyond redemption. You always believed in people, even when I didn't. I watched you forgive things I could never have forgiven. That's what made you stronger than me. And now I'm asking you to be that woman one more time. Help her. When she's truly ready to be helped. Not when she's scared, not when she's desperate, but when she understands what she's done. When she's truly willing to change. The money in that account is not for her comfort. It's for her second chance. But only you can decide if she deserves it. I trust your judgment more than I've ever trusted anything in my life. With all my love, Robert. I let the letter fall gently onto the table. My hands covered my mouth. Tears had started to fall, not the kind born of pain or anger, but of weight. The weight of love, of responsibility, of memory. Robert had anticipated this moment, anticipated that Angela might fail us, and that I might have to choose what kind of mother I still wanted to be. I picked up the key. It was small, unremarkable, just a simple piece of metal, but it held power. I didn't know how much money was in that account. It didn't matter. The real value was the decision it demanded. Angela came into the kitchen a few minutes later, dressed in old sweatpants and a t-shirt I hadn't seen in years. "You opened it?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She looked down, as if bracing herself. Was it bad? I paused. "No," I said, "but it was important." She nodded, not pressing further. We spent the rest of the day in an unspoken truce. I cooked, she cleaned. We didn't talk about the apartment, or Edward, or the envelope. But that night, something changed. Angela stood in the doorway of the kitchen as I dried the dishes. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "why didn't you just tell me you were angry? Why didn't you fight me when I sold the house, when I took the truck? Why didn't you scream at me?" I turned to face her. Her eyes were glossy. Not from self-pity this time, but something closer to guilt. "Because screaming wouldn't have changed anything," I said gently. "You weren't ready to hear it." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she let on. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," she whispered. "I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, but I said, you're here now." She walked over and hugged me again, this time, not with desperation, but sincerity. And as I held her, I felt the weight of Robert's key in my pocket. Not yet, I thought, not yet. Spring arrived quietly that year. The garden came back to life buds on the rose bushes, the familiar song of birds nesting in Robert's oak tree. The air was soft again, forgiving. Angela had been living with me for nearly 2 months. It was a quiet arrangement. No expectations, no demands, just slow, deliberate healing. She took up part-time work at a local cafe, nothing glamorous, nothing worthy of her old Instagram stories. But it was honest work, the kind of work she used to scoff at. Now she wore her tired feet like a badge of honor. Some mornings I would see her leaving for the early shift dark circles under her eyes, hands chapped from dish soap, and I would feel something I hadn't felt for her in a long time. Respect. She never asked for money. Not once. She never brought up Edward, never whined about the eviction notice, never questioned why her apartment had slipped out from under her. She simply worked, cleaned, cooked sometimes, and apologized in quiet ways like folding my laundry before I could, or fixing the old back gate Robert never got around to. But she never brought up the envelope again, and neither did I. Until one morning I found her in the backyard sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee. She looked peaceful, not the forced kind of calm she used to wear like a mask, but real peace, earned peace. I stepped outside and sat beside her. "Do you remember," I said, "when you were little and you wanted to sell lemonade to buy that plastic tiara from the corner store?" She laughed softly. "I was convinced I'd be rich in a day." "You made $2.50. I thought it was a fortune." We both smiled. "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "You've changed." She looked down. I had no choice. "There's always a choice," I said. "That's what makes change real." Angela sipped her coffee, thinking. "Do you still think about Dad?" she asked. "Every day." "I do too," she said. "Not like before, just memories now. The good ones. The things he used to say," I nodded. "He left us more than we realized." There was a long pause. Then I stood and walked inside. I returned a moment later with the small metallic key in my hand. Angela looked at it, confused. "What's that?" "Something your father left behind," I said. "For you." She didn't reach for it. her face twisted, hesitant. Why would he leave me anything? After what I did? Because he believed in second chances, I said, but only when they're earned. Her eyes filled. I don't deserve it. That's for me to decide, I said, placing the key into her palm. She stared at it like it weighed more than gold. What does it open? A safe deposit box, I said, at Rockwell Trust Bank. Inside is your beginning. Not a gift, not a reward, but a tool. Angela closed her fingers around the key. Tears spilled over silently. I'll use it right, she whispered. I promise. I know, I said. We sat in silence for a while. The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the trees. Somewhere, a lawnmower hummed in the distance. The world carried on, indifferent and yet somehow perfectly in tune with this quiet moment. Later that week, Angela went to the bank alone. She didn't tell me what was in the box, and I didn't ask, because it wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the moment when a daughter finally chose to become something more than her mistakes, when a mother finally stopped holding on to pain like proof, when trust, so long buried, was finally allowed to bloom again. That evening, she came home with tired eyes and a soft smile. She didn't say much, just hugged me. A real hug. The kind you give when you're no longer afraid of being seen. And I knew we had made it through the storm, not as the same people, but as something better. A mother and daughter who had found each other again, not through wealth, but through truth. You've just watched a woman lose everything, and then choose not to fight with anger, but to rebuild with love, intelligence, and quiet strength. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she simply waited until her daughter came back, not for money, but for redemption. Some things you can sell, but some things, once lost, take a lifetime to rebuild. If you're a daughter, call your mother. If you're a mother, know that your love still matters. And if you believe that love, real love, can heal what betrayal tried to destroy, leave a comment, share this story, and remember, sometimes the strongest revenge is simply becoming impossible to replace.